Hi, this is TheHande and welcome back to Leaders of Finland, and this time we're going to talk about the Antti Rinne government. The Antti Rinne government came into power after the government of Juha Sipilä, which I made an entire video about, and it preceded the current government led by Sanna Marin. And I briefly mentioned before that the Antti Rinne government had an extremely short life, coming into power in June of 2019, and being ousted by the December of that same year. Now, funny enough, the Sanna Marin government, which currently is in power, is essentially the same as the Antti Rinne government, just with a different prime minister. So, what exactly happened in 6 months that caused Antti Rinne to lose his position as prime minister? Well, for that, we'll obviously have to look at how he won the election. And of course, how he won the 2019 parliamentary election was, of course, because he was going up against the Center Party and Juha Sipilä, who had only 3 months earlier resigned from his prime ministership. But his government still decided to stay on as a caretaker government until a new government would take office. So with the Center Party having decimated its popularity, it was not that surprising that the biggest opposition party, the SDP, obviously ended up having a strong showing in the election. In the next governmental lineup, they would include Left Alliance and the Green Party, as well as the Swedish People's Party, which had decided to stay out of the Sipilä government, meaning that Sipilä was about to head a very strong left-leaning government. However, this makeup did not have majority in the parliament, so of course that meant that they had to also invite one of the other big parties into the fold. And somewhat shockingly, they chose the Center Party. Now at this point, Juha Sipilä, however, was stepping down from being the head of the Center Party, and essentially were now becoming just a partner party to the SDP. And Antti Rinne got very fast to work, correcting some of the bigger mistakes of the Sipilä government that were still around, like the activity model. So Finns probably will know that Rinne's fall from his prime ministership had something to do with the big postal workers strike, which happened in late 2019. Now, why was there a big postal strike at the end of 2019? Well, that was because of a new wage agreement that Minister Sirpa Paatero had approved was going to come into effect in 2020. Now, the Finnish Postal Service, like the postal services of many other countries, has long been suffering from cost efficiency issues owing to the fact that fewer and fewer people are sending actual physical mail. And already for a couple of decades, Finland has been trying to find different ways to save money on this front. However, most of these solutions have not been very efficient, and the Finnish Postal Service is kind of running into a situation where they really can't cut costs on any meaningful level at this point without completely hindering their service. So one of the obvious things that the Finnish government was maybe a good idea to consider was just lowering the wages of postal workers across the board. However, this could not be done with the previous wage agreement that was dedicated to just the postal workers. So the Finnish government's big brain move was to simply put postal workers under a different, less expensive wage agreement that already existed. And the wage agreement that they decided upon was the media wage agreement. Yes, postal workers were going to have the same wages as people working in television, radio, and print media. And what were the immediate effects? Well, some postal workers would have seen their wages drop as much as 50%. Which, as you can probably guess, most postal workers were not happy about, and which is why the postal workers' strike then came into effect. Now, the minister responsible, Sirpa Paatero, tried to be very diplomatic early on, saying that she wasn't aware that the wage agreement was going to come into effect the following year, which ended up being kind of bullshit because, she had signed off on it. And the simple fact that she was even willing to make such claims really raised a lot of questions about her competence in this position. And one of the people that unfortunately kind of threw her under the bus was Prime Minister Antti Rinne himself, with Rinne putting himself into the front lines thinking that he could somehow help the strike go a lot smoother. Unfortunately, by doing so, Rinne completely opened himself up to criticism from all the opposition parties, and very soon his government was getting torn to shreds by the opposition. Then the Center Party stepped in and said that Antti Rinne needed to step down as Prime Minister or else they would leave the government. And losing majority representation in the parliament was such a big risk that the SDP decided to oblige and move Rinne from office. Now, you would think that the threats of the Center Party, while pretty severe, shouldn't have been enough to have Rinne completely get removed from his position. So to me, it looked like the SDP really must have had some weird pressure coming from the Center Party for them to buckle like that. But if you look more into the motives of the Center Party, the reason they decided to oust Rinne started to make a little bit more sense. Now, I haven't really talked about what kind of prime minister Rinne was for the very short amount of time that he was in office. Now, Rinne had been a very bolsterous opposition leader during the Sipilä years, and that was probably one of the big reasons why people voted for him en masse. However, Rinne already had a bit of a reputation as a bit of a cringy politician. During the previous election, he actually kind of got a bit of a rep as an unhealthy eater due to a pasta recipe that he made known to the public. But Rinne also had a tendency of attacking his political opponents, sometimes with questionable facts. And once he became prime minister, he never really stopped saying stuff that sounded good to him or he thought would sound good to his voters. He had a tendency of making a lot of promises that his own ministries had not really agreed to, which was already causing a little bit of friction within his government. And you have to remember that the Center Party was, of course, very much humbled by their defeat in the 2019 election and by everything else that Sipilä had put them through previously. So throughout their participation in the Rinne government, what the Center Party was probably hoping was that if they were able to keep their head down and play nice with the other kids, then eventually they would build up their political reputation once again and be able to become a major player in Finnish politics once again. However, due to Rinne's bungling, it was starting to become obvious that they were not getting any kind of positive PR out of being in the Rinne government. And Rinne finally throwing himself into the midst of the labor battle of the postal workers was the last straw. Now, the reason Rinne probably thought he could help out was because he himself was actually a former union rep, so he already had history with working with them. But in the end, Rinne's very alpha male approach to this particular problem just put a big target on his back, which is what ended up killing his time in the prime ministership prematurely. And so that was my brief look into the Antti Rinne government. I'm TheHande, see you on the next one.